Every great journey starts with a single step, and you just took yours by landing here. On this channel, we explore ideas, share stories, and create content that inspires. Subscribe now and let's continue this journey together. The party cost my mother-in-law 18 months to plan. I know because she mentioned it every time I saw her. At Christmas, at Easter, at the quarterly family dinners she ran like board meetings, with printed agendas and assigned seating and wine she'd selected to pair with each course. 80 guests. A tent in the backyard strung with bistro lights, a string quartet for the cocktail hour, and a DJ for after dinner. Because her husband had grown up on Motown, and she believed in honoring a man's tastes on his retirement night. All of it orchestrated to celebrate my father-in-law. Stepping back from the commercial real estate firm he'd spent 4 decades building, I stood in the middle of that tent, on a Saturday evening in October, in a dress the color of deep water, with my husband's hand resting lightly at the small of my back. He was smiling at his father. His father was smiling at the room. His mother was watching me with the particular expression she'd worn for 9 years. Not quite satisfaction. Not quite disdain. Something between the two. Something that required effort to maintain. As though my continued presence in the family required a specific calibration of her face. 2 hours later, my husband stood up, clinked his fork against his champagne flute, and read from an index card. He called it a toast. What he read was a list. 8 items, each one a carefully worded version of the same central claim, that I had failed. As a wife. As a daughter-in-law. As a partner in the life his family had apparently been generous enough to allow me into. He moved through the list in the measured voice he used in client presentations. Unhurried, reasonable sounding. The voice of a man presenting facts rather than cruelties. The way I'd never fully embraced his family's obligations. The way my career had consistently taken precedence. The way I'd failed to grow with him as his responsibilities expanded. 8 items. Numbered. He ended by saying he was beginning a new chapter. Alone. His mother raised her glass. His father nodded once, slowly, the way he nodded when a deal closed exactly as he'd intended. 80 guests stared at their tablecloths. I sat very still. Champagne in my hand, the October air cool against my bare arms, and something moved through me from the crown of my head down to the soles of my feet. Not shock. I'd moved past shock 3 weeks earlier. What I felt was the particular calm of a person who has already decided, who has already done the hard work, and now only has to act. I set down my glass, I stood up. What I said next made 4 people go pale. What I placed on the table made my father-in-law reach into his jacket pocket and grip his phone. Let me tell you how I got there. My husband and I met at a fundraiser for a children's literacy nonprofit. He was charming, in the way of someone carefully trained to be charming. Warm at the surface. Attentive, always angled toward the right impression. I was 31. I mistook that polish for depth. It took 9 years and an index card to understand the difference. The first 6 years were genuinely good, not without friction, no marriage is, but good in the ways that matter. We had our Sunday routines, the farmer's market, coffee on the back porch, the long October drives he'd suggest out of nowhere, just to see the leaves turn. He was thoughtful in small ways. He remembered things I'd mentioned in passing. He showed up when I needed him. He made me feel consistently, like I was someone he had chosen and would keep choosing. I was happy. I believed he was too. The shift started about 18 months before the party. And it was gradual enough that I explained it away for longer than I should have. He started working longer hours. I understood. His father was preparing to step back from the firm, and the transition was significant. But then came the family dinners he attended without me, claiming the guest list was already set. Then the Sunday afternoons that used to be ours, now spent, at his parents' house, going over documents. Even though he never mentioned specific documents, and never brought anything home. His questions about my work dried up. He'd always been genuinely curious about what I navigated as an HR director at a regional hospital network. The organizational politics, the difficult conversations, and then one month he simply stopped asking. I mentioned it once, lightly. He said he was stressed. I believed him. I noticed other things, smaller things. He stopped refilling my coffee on weekend mornings, something he'd done without thinking for years. He started taking phone calls in the garage. He picked up the habit of checking his phone at dinner, holding it below the table at a slight angle, the screen tilted away. I cataloged these things without consciously cataloging them. The way you sense weather changing before you can name it. The first discovery was accidental. I was looking for the spare key to the locked filing cabinet in our home office. We kept important documents there: tax returns, insurance policies, the deed to our house. My husband usually had the key on him, but there was a spare. And I needed the previous year's tax return for a refinancing application I was helping my mother navigate. His desk drawer seemed the logical place. I found the key in the back of the top drawer, beneath a leather portfolio. I wasn't looking for anything else. I took the key, unlocked the cabinet, and pulled out the folder I needed. I would have closed everything again except that the tax return folder was thicker than the previous year's had been. Clipped inside, behind the return, were two things. First, a bank statement for an LLC I'd never heard of, my husband's name, 14 months of transactions. Most recent Abbas, $97,000. Second, a sticky note in his handwriting. Call locksmith Mon AM clipped beneath it. A second note in the same pen. Have her sign before she talks to anyone. I stood at the filing cabinet for a long time without moving. Then I replaced everything, locked the cabinet, returned the key exactly where I'd found it, and went to make coffee. I didn't say anything to my husband that night, or the next night either. I have a capacity for stillness under pressure that surprised even me. It probably comes from 20 years of HR work, from learning that the person who speaks first in a tense room usually loses the advantage. I needed to understand what I was dealing with before I moved a single piece. The LLC took 4 minutes to find through the state's business entity search. Registered 14 months ago. My husband listed as the sole member. The registered agent was a law firm in the city I recognized, one his father's company occasionally used. Our joint financial records took longer because I was meticulous. I managed our household budget, something my husband had ceded to me early in the marriage. He said I was better at it. He was right. I was better at it, which meant I knew what our income should look like, and I could see where it didn't. The gap across 14 months was approximately $120,000. Commission income from several of his larger transactions had been routed differently. Not all at once, not obviously, but with a consistency that only revealed itself when you looked at the complete picture. I checked property records on a Tuesday afternoon, sitting in my car in the hospital parking garage with my laptop balanced on my knees. There was a condominium registered in my husband's name alone, purchased 8 months ago. The address was 11 minutes from our house. I found an attorney the next morning. I told my assistant I had a dentist appointment. The attorney came recommended by a colleague who described her own divorce settlement as the one time in her life when being prepared had genuinely paid off. She met me in a corner office and listened without interrupting as I laid out what I'd found. When I finished, she opened her notepad. "You're entitled to your marital share of all assets accumulated during the marriage," she said. "That includes assets he may have attempted to shield. Both the LLC transfers and the separately held property are documentable through a forensic accountant." She paused. "Is there anything in your name alone? Any individual accounts?" My aunt had died 4 years earlier and left me $38,000. I'd kept it in a savings account I'd opened before we married. I'd never touched it. My husband knew it existed the way you know a piece of furniture exists. Registered somewhere in the background, never attended to. I transferred it to a new account at a different bank before I left the parking garage. The piece I hadn't anticipated came from entirely outside my immediate life, and it almost slipped past me. About 10 days after I found the LLC statement, a message arrived in my LinkedIn inbox from someone I didn't recognize. He had been CFO of my father-in-law's company until 3 years ago. The message was 4 sentences. He'd seen a mutual connection post about the upcoming retirement party. He knew the family. He had something he wanted to ask if I was willing. Was I okay? I almost deleted it. It had the shape of something suspicious. Too convenient, too precisely timed. But the directness of it stopped me. No flattery, no preamble. Just a plain question from someone who apparently had something specific to say and was asking permission before saying it. I wrote back one line, "I'm okay, what did you want to ask?" We met at a coffee shop 40 minutes from our town, in a city where neither of us was likely to see anyone we knew. He arrived before me. Mid-50s, quietly built, with the look of someone who had spent 3 years being very careful about everything. He ordered black coffee. I ordered tea. We sat near the window. He'd been let go from the firm after discovering that my father-in-law had been systematically underreporting income from certain commercial properties. Small percentages, precise enough to matter over a decade. Conservative enough to avoid triggering an audit. He'd discovered it during routine quarterly reconciliations and brought it to my father-in-law directly, because he believed that was his obligation. Within 2 weeks, he was out. His severance included a non-disclosure agreement with substantial penalties attached. But NDAs can't cover everything, he said. He set a folder on the table between us. I kept my own records. I've kept them for 3 years. Inside were copies of internal financial reports, the actual figures, annotated alongside the versions that had been filed publicly. The discrepancies were marked in red, running consistently across multiple properties. There was also a set of incorporation documents. The original papers for the firm, showing that my father-in-law hadn't founded the company alone. He'd had a college friend as equal partner. The friend had been bought out in year 7, under terms that looked clean on paper. A mutual decision, fair compensation, properly executed. The former CFO had also found a draft letter. An internal memo my father-in-law had written to his own attorney, and apparently decided not to send. The draft preserved in a folder misfiled among quarterly reports. The memo outlined, in my father-in-law's own words, the pressure strategy he intended to use, to push his partner toward accepting terms that weren't favorable. The co-founder's family still exists, he told me. His daughter is a corporate attorney in Chicago. She has never known any of this. I looked up from the folder and asked him why he was bringing it to me. After 3 years. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. Because I watched what they did to me and I didn't warn anyone, he said. I've had 3 years to think about that. He met my eyes. They're doing to you what they did to me. Except with a party. I told him what I'd found, the LLC, the condo, the sticky note in my husband's handwriting. He nodded like a man confirming something he'd already expected. The locksmith note is about the house, he said. They'll change the locks after the party while you're still in shock. The papers they want you to sign? They'll be positioned as practical. Quick, something to spare everyone the unpleasantness of a drawn-out process. We exchanged phone numbers. I drove home and sat in the driveway for a long time before going inside. The 3 weeks between that coffee shop and the party were the strangest of my life. And also, in some way I still find hard to explain, the most focused. I went to work every day. I met with my attorney twice more. I engaged the forensic accountant she recommended, and gave her everything I had. I lived inside my ordinary life with my husband, dinner, television, the occasional Saturday errand, and I sustained it with the same attention I'd always given it, because dismantling something before the right moment only wastes energy. He had no idea. I know because he grew warmer as the party approached, the particular warmth of a person building towards something, performing a backdrop for what's coming. The last thing I needed was someone on the inside. A colleague of mine, someone I'd worked alongside for 6 years, the kind of person who could read a room and had the nerve to act in one. Ran an event coordination business on the side. She knew people in catering. I told her carefully and in full what was happening and what I needed from her. There was an opening on the catering staff for the party. Someone had canceled. She took the slot. We met twice to go over the layout, the table arrangements, the timing. I showed her where I'd be sitting. I showed her the 3 envelopes I'd prepared, each containing a different set of documents, each addressed. I told her what I expected my husband to say, based on the sticky note and everything else, and what I intended to say in response. I stood in her kitchen and practiced the speech out loud, until it stopped sounding like a speech. Hold the pause before you name the LLC, she told me, a full beat longer than feels natural. Let it settle. On the afternoon of the party, my attorney's office had the divorce filing finalized. My husband's office received service of process at 4:17 in the afternoon. He didn't check his work email until after 6. By then we were already in the car, on our way to his parents' house, and he was telling me his mother had outdone herself with the tent. I said I was sure she had. I arrived in my dress the color of deep water. I shook hands with 80 people and accepted compliments and let my mother-in-law air kiss both my cheeks. I told her the tent was beautiful because it was. I watched my father-in-law work the room with the ease of a man who had spent 40 years, ensuring that rooms worked exactly as he intended. Every guest in their proper place, every exchange moving toward its designed conclusion. My husband was loose that evening, almost buoyant. He refilled my champagne glass twice, something he hadn't done spontaneously in months. He touched my shoulder when he introduced me to his father's oldest clients. He was performing the warmth of our marriage for the room, establishing a backdrop. The toast would land harder against evidence of affection. I understood the calculation. I'd been doing HR work for a long time. The string quartet played through cocktail hour. Dinner was served in courses. I ate. I kept my hands steady. The toast came after the main course. He stood, clinked the fork against the flute, reached into his jacket and unfolded the index card. I will give him this. He was composed. That measured voice, those 8 numbered points. The room shifted from politely attentive to profoundly uncomfortable somewhere around point 4, and by point 6 no one was pretending to look anywhere except the table directly in front of them. One of his father's clients cleared his throat, and then stopped, as though he'd thought better of it. To new beginnings, my husband said, alone. His mother raised her glass, her face held triumph the way still water holds a reflection, flat and complete. I set down my champagne. I stood up. My colleague in the black apron shifted half a step to her left, and the envelopes were exactly within reach. Thank you, I said. The words came out exactly as I'd practiced. Level, unhurried, audible to every corner of the tent. I appreciate the honesty. Since we're being honest tonight, I'd like to add a few things. I picked up the first envelope. Over the past 14 months, I said, approximately $120,000 in marital income was transferred into an LLC registered solely in your name. My attorney has documented every transaction, and you'll receive the full forensic accounting on Monday. I set the documents on the table between us and held his gaze for exactly 1 moment before moving on. You also purchased a condominium 8 months ago, in your name alone. That property will be included in the asset division. The tent was so quiet I could hear the DJ's equipment, humming faintly beyond the back fence. I turned to my father-in-law. I'd also like you to know, I said, that your former CFO and I have been in conversation for several weeks. He has preserved copies of the internal financial reports from the past decade. The actual figures, alongside the versions that were filed. He also has the original incorporation documents from when you co-founded this company, including a draft of correspondence related to the terms of your co-founder's departure. I watched the color leave my father-in-law's face. It went slowly, beginning at his collar. I placed the second envelope in front of him. His attorney will be in contact Monday morning. This is a courtesy copy. My husband said my name. Once, the way you say something you suddenly realize you've already lost. I picked up my bag. I wish you both well, I said, and I meant it in the way you mean things that have already been decided. To new beginnings. I walked toward the tent opening. The October air hit my face, cold and clean, smelling of someone's fireplace 2 streets over, and the damp grass pressing up beneath the bistro lights. I passed my colleague on the way out, and she gave one small, precise nod. The nod of someone who has done exactly what she came to do. The former CFO was waiting at the end of the driveway as we'd arranged. He handed me a key card for the hotel, where he'd reserved a room in my name, because I had no intention of going back inside that house. How did it go? He asked. I thought about it for a moment. Exactly as it should have, I said. 3 months later, I signed the lease on an apartment with south-facing windows and a kitchen I chose entirely for myself. The layout, the shelves, the single good knife on the magnetic strip above the counter. No input, no consensus. No one else's sense of what was appropriate for a woman in my position. The divorce settled the way divorces do when one party is exposed mid-maneuver, contentiously at first, then with a kind of grim efficiency once the forensic documentation was complete. The condominium was included in the marital estate, so were the LLC's holdings, the $120,000. Returned, with interest, to the marital accounting. My father-in-law's company is under review. The co-founder's daughter is a thorough and well-resourced attorney, and 3 years of meticulously preserved records are a substantial foundation for what she is building. The former CFO's non-disclosure agreement is being challenged on procedural grounds. None of that is mine to manage. I handed over what I had to the people who had standing to use it. And I've tried to make peace with the parts that are no longer in my hands. I accepted the promotion I'd been offered, and declined twice at my husband's quiet insistence that the travel would be too disruptive to our life together. The life I have now has more room in it than I knew was possible. The travel is fine. Some mornings, in a hotel in a city I've never been to before, I sit with my coffee and feel something that takes me a moment to identify. Because I haven't felt it in so long, I feel like myself. I think about the index card sometimes. 8 items, numbered, read aloud in a tent full of people who had watched me try for 9 years. Every failure carefully curated, arranged in order, delivered with a rehearsed calm designed to strip something from me in front of an audience. What my husband didn't understand, what none of them understood, is that you cannot humiliate someone who has already decided who she is. By the time I stood up, I wasn't defending myself. I was simply telling the truth. It turns out that has always been enough.